Hello everybody, my name is Stellaris, and today I am making a tier list based on what Fire Emblem games are best for beginners. Considering that there is a new Fire Emblem coming out, Fire Emblem Engage, I wanted to make a tier list for best and worst games to play first if you are a beginner to the series. Since new game equals new players. Alright. Gonna go through chronological order, and there will only be one game that we'll be incorporating, and that will be Heroes. But first off, we have FE1, and this one's just going straight into terrible. It's a very dated game. In my opinion, it is the worst game in the series because of it being dated, but it gave us Marth and the general idea of Fire Emblem, so it is unique in that one purpose. There's not really much to say here. The speed run for it is like 6 minutes or something absurd. Really feel bad for the people that decided that this is the first game that they wanted to play, because it was on the Nintendo eShop for a bit. It's just really hard to get through. Next is Gaiden. Putting it as bad, I wouldn't say it's terrible. It's definitely a better starter game than FE1. Also goes on my opinion that I think it is just a better put together game, but it does not give a traditional Fire Emblem feel. And we'll get more into what traditional Fire Emblem really feels like later on. But it takes place on the continent of I can only think of the Balm continent. Also takes place about at the same time as FE1 and 3, which we'll get to in a bit, so it's a side story of sorts. I'd recommend it to Fire Emblem fans if they wanted to get into some of the older games. Next is FE3. It's also going in bad. It's kind of hard to tell what's different about FE1 and 3 besides the fact that it is an updated version of FE1 plus an additional story. There's just some unique aspects about it which make it not as good as Gaiden. Like, Cavaliers aren't allowed inside, and they have to dismount once they're inside, which really bogs things up and slows it down. Besides that, it's a very big improvement over FE1, and very needed. Next is FE4. This one is also going into terrible. If you need skills to double, it's just, in my opinion, not a great game in general. And for a beginner, this would just, in general, be terrible to start with. The maps are humongous. They take forever. Skills are a must, and basically, if any of your units do not have a horse or a Pegasus or Wyvern, they are effectively useless. Would not recommend it for a beginner whatsoever. It's in the fact that each map is supposed to represent a country, so that's why the maps are so big. Next up, we have Fire Emblem 776, or Thracia 776, and this one goes back here. It's going to be the worst one in general. It is known for being extremely tough and extremely unforgiving. Also has the same skills in place as Genealogy. It's smaller, but a necessarily helpful thing when a lot of the maps have fog of war. It's just generally not fun to play or even watch, really. Next we have Fire Emblem 6, Roy's game. Some people will play Roy's game because they know him from Smash Brothers. This is another one I would not recommend. It is known for being pretty tough, and for beginners, the toughness scale would rise, if that makes sense. Not much else to say here besides personal opinions, which I'll try to keep them out of this video. Roy's not really all that great of a lord, so that really does hinder where it would go on this list too. And the story is fine, I suppose. Mostly notable for being the first game without Kaga, and for having Roy, and that's about it. Next we have Fire Emblem 7. This is the first game that actually came out of just being in Japan. And I'll put it in decent. It was kind of geared towards beginners and new people in the series, but I don't think it did a great job of that. Decently balanced all around. There are 3 modes you can do, plus 2 different difficulties. It's unique in the sense that it has 3 separate lords, with each with unique stories you can all go through. Not much else to say about it. It's pretty bland as Fire Emblem games go. Fire Emblem 8. This is one of the best ones to start with, especially the older games. Get a hang of how the older games are. Obviously, they have a lot of differences with how modern games line up. This one is clearly the best of the GBAFE for beginners. It's relatively easy, excluding a couple maps. And the lords are alright, but you also get a really good dragon, which is, for those who haven't played Fire Emblem yet, a really good starter character that starts off with typically high growths, or high bases, but low growths. They're typically a paladin of some sort. He stays good pretty much throughout the whole game and will never ever let you down, which makes it significantly easier and really good for beginners. Next up is Fire Emblem Path of Radiance. And that's also going up here. It's not as good as Sacred Stones in my opinion, but it's also pretty good for beginners. Bonus XP really helps. There's an easy mode, which was made specifically just for places outside of Japan. And if you play that, it's pretty easy to get through. Good story, likable characters, really good presentation. I very much recommend this. So unique for having Lugus, which are like cat people and bird people that all act uniquely. It also brings back skills, but is not as necessary as, say, genealogy for skills to be used. Up is Radiant Dawn. This one's just going in terrible. This game is really hard. That's all I really gotta say about why it's gonna be down there. It's really hard. It's very long. And it's a sequel, which also makes it worse. Because, in essence, it just makes things harder to understand. If I was Insys and Nintendo, I would have released Path of Radiance on the Wii, so you could get more players with a easier game right away, and then released Radiant Dawn. Notable for being one of the lowest selling Fire Emblem games, it didn't really make much traction, it still doesn't. But if you fall in love with Path of Radiance, I do recommend playing Radiant Dawn at some point. It's a good sequel. It's just really tough for beginners, in my opinion. Fire Emblem Shadow Dragons, game for the DS. Since it is pretty easy to get your hands on, I'd say it's easier to get your hands on this than it would be for basically any other game except for maybe 8 on this list so far. Before the 3DS, Fire Emblem games weren't popular, so now if you try to buy them, it is extremely hard. It only goes in good tier because it's kind of just basic FE1. It's a remake of FE1, so you get Marth back, and that's about it. It's a really basic game, pretty good for beginners. So, also there's a lot of different difficulties incorporated in with this game. So, easier modes can be really easy, and the harder modes are really hard. Also, this is the first game with reclassing, so it allows you a lot of different options on how to play the game. Next up, I have 12 New Mystery of Emblem. It's going at the bottom of decent for now. My opinion is it upgrades straight up on what Shadow Dragon is. But it, once again, it is a sequel, so that would automatically bump it down. And hard to get your hands on a ROM of it that is English. If not, you have to learn how to translate it yourself. Despite that, I really like this game. It's not great for beginners. But it's also the first game with casual mode and an avatar, which brings us to our next Robin and Awakening. This one is really, really great for beginners. This is where a lot of people started. Fun, pretty easy game unless you're on Lunatic or Lunatic Plus, in which case it's very, very hard. Reclassing has a different system in it. Characters in this game are extremely popular, as 3 of them are in Smash with Robin, Lucina, and Chrom. It's a very basic story and basic game besides that. Throughout all the years, I think it's rather lovable. Next is Fire Emblem Fates Birthright. Going in good. This game is really easy, just the combat can be a little odd for first-time players. And the story is pretty notoriously bad in all of the Fates game. The reason it's going in good is because it is really, really, really easy to find, and really easy to complete. Next up is Conquest, another part of the Fates games, but it's going in bad. I actually love this game, so it kind of hurts to put it in bad. I'll probably put it here, because it's just really, really difficult. And this was actually the second ever Fire Emblem game that I got. And even on just normal difficulty, it was so tough that I had to go into Phoenix mode to beat it. It's just my first time now. Obviously, I'm much better at the game. Very lovable characters. A lot more, quote-unquote, morally gray, and really a lot more fun than Birthright. We have Revelation, meant to be played after you beat both Birthright and Conquest, therefore it goes in terrible. Wouldn't make sense to play it any other way, plus you can't really get your hands on it anymore, unless you already had it. Or let's say if you buy a physical cartridge of Conquest or Birthright, and it already has all three routes on there. This Fire Emblem Echoes, going at top of decent. Not particularly hard. It's just an odd Fire Emblem experience, in my own opinion. Rates are notoriously low, but it is the first Fire Emblem game with full-on voice acting. It has a wonderful art style, great music, great presentation. It's a bit harder to get your hands on. It's just kind of complicated and not a traditional Fire Emblem experiences, which kind of makes me want to put it at this rank instead of saying good. Which I think overall the game would land in good. This is a tier list for beginners and not for people more in the Fire Emblem scene, I'd say. Finally, out of the mainline games I'll be covering is Three Houses. This is just the best for beginners, seeing that is the only one out on Switch aside from Warriors and Three Hopes and Mirage Sessions, but those won't be covered because they are all spin-off games. I would not recommend any of these first. Extraordinarily easy to get your hands on. Easy to pick up and play. Great character design, great voice acting, good music, overall okay presentation. Once again, it doesn't have the traditional Fire Emblem experience, but the way that it's made, it's really good at bringing in new players to the Fire Emblem series. And finally, we have Heroes, which goes at the bottom of good. If you don't like gacha games, it would be understandable if you didn't want to play this. However, for beginners in a way that gives you an opportunity to experience what Fire Emblem characters are like and what basic Fire Emblem gameplay looks like, even though its gameplay is very, very different from any other mainline game. It's free on any app store basically, so you can just pick it up and start playing whenever you want. And that's why it's so high up on this list. Right, hope you enjoyed. I've been thinking about making this for about a week now. I'm really glad that I actually made it. Hope you all enjoy. And I hope that this list helps at least some people trying to find out which Fire Emblem game that they should start with.